I stared at the small, crumpled envelope in my hand, disbelief etching every line of my face. My niece, Emma, had innocently handed it to me, saying it was from Grandma. Why the secrecy? I glanced at the clock. It was almost time for Emma to leave. "Thanks, sweetie," I said, tucking the envelope into my pocket as I heard my sister's car pull up outside. After a warm goodbye, I closed the door, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. My name is Avery Sullivan. At 35, I had carved out a respectable career in marketing, leading a team in a bustling firm downtown. Life, for the most part, seemed comfortably predictable. That is until Nolan, my husband of 6 years, began acting oddly. Returning to the living room, I settled on the couch, the envelope now burning a hole in my pocket. With a deep breath, I tore it open. The words scrawled across the paper were simple, yet earth-shattering. "Avery, watch Nolan closely. Things aren't as they seem." I frowned. Nolan, my carefree, often irresponsible husband, had his quirks, but what did Mom mean? Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't a disaster either. Since meeting Nolan at a mutual friend's gallery opening, life had been a whirlwind. His spontaneity was infectious, his disregard for convention charming in its own way. We married within a year, a decision that felt right at the time. But now doubt crept in, fueled by Mom's cryptic warning. The past few months had seen Nolan more secretive, his phone always on silent, his late-night work sessions more frequent. I had attributed it to his job at the tech startup, but Mom's note made me question everything. I decided to confront him. As I stood, a key turned in the lock, and Nolan entered, his face tired but smiling. "Hey, Avery, sorry I'm late. Got caught up at work," he said, shrugging off his coat. I watched him, a storm of emotions brewing inside me. The perfect opportunity to address my growing suspicions had just walked through the door. "Nolan, we need to talk," I began, my voice steady but tinged with an edge. He looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about us, about your recent behavior." "I'm worried," I said, clutching the now crumpled envelope. Nolan's expression shifted, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place crossing his face. "Avery, His words trailed off as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, a visible tension settling over him. "I need to take this. We'll talk later, okay?" I nodded, frustration simmering. As he stepped into the other room, I realized the confrontation would have to wait. But then, a sharp pain shot through my chest. Nolan collapsed, clutching his left arm, his face contorted in agony. "Nolan," I rushed to him, my heart pounding. In that moment, all anger and suspicion evaporated, replaced by sheer panic. As I dialed 911, my mind raced. What was happening? Was this related to the secrets he was keeping? The questions swirled, but one thing was clear. Nolan's life hung in the balance, and with it the truth I was desperate to uncover. As the ambulance siren faded into the distance, I sat alone in the quiet room. The envelope lay forgotten on the floor, its message a haunting echo of the chaos that had just unfolded. The hospital's sterile walls did nothing to ease the turmoil churning inside me. Nolan lay in his bed, a maze of tubes and monitors surrounding him. The doctor had said it was a mild heart attack, but he was stable. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, overshadowed by the growing web of suspicion. As Nolan slept, I couldn't help but replay our last conversation. The phone call, his sudden collapse, it felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. Over the next few days, I decided to dig deeper. Nolan's phone, usually guarded like a treasure, lay unattended on the nightstand. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the password screen glaring at me. I tried his birthday, nothing. Then, on a hunch, I typed in our anniversary date. It clicked open. The texts were damning. Flirtatious exchanges, plans to meet, all with someone named Clara. My heart pounded as I scrolled through message after message, each word a dagger. I confronted Nolan the next day. His initial shock quickly turned to defensiveness. "Avery, it's not what you think," he stammered, trying to sit up. "Not what I think. Nolan, you're having an affair." My voice cracked, anger and hurt warring within me. He sighed, his eyes avoiding mine. "It was a mistake, Avery. I never meant to hurt you." "Mistake? How long has this been going on?" I demanded, fighting back tears. "A few months," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. I stood there, reeling from his confession. The lies, the deceit, it was overwhelming. I needed air, space to think. Without another word, I left the room, Nolan's pleas fading behind me. The next few days were a blur. The evidence was undeniable, but I struggled with what to do. Our marriage, once a source of joy, now felt like a sham. As I sat in the hospital cafeteria, my phone buzzed. It was my sister. "How's Nolan?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "He's stable," I replied, my voice hollow. "And you? You sound off." I hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "He's been having an affair, Jess, with someone named Clara." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh, Avery, I'm so sorry." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. "I don't know what to do. I feel so betrayed." "Avery, listen to me," Jess said firmly. "You need to think about yourself now. Nolan made his choice. It's time you made yours." Her words struck a chord. Jess was right. Nolan had made his choice, and now it was my turn. As I hung up, a new resolve settled within me. Nolan's deceit had shattered our marriage, but I wouldn't let it break me. It was time for retribution, time to make Nolan face the consequences of his actions. I returned to Nolan's room, my steps determined. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Avery, No, Nolan. It's my turn to speak. Your affair, your lies, it's over. We're over." His face crumpled, but I didn't waver. This was just the beginning. Nolan would soon learn the true cost of his betrayal. In the days following my declaration, Nolan's attempts at reconciliation became more desperate, but the trust was shattered. His words fell on deaf ears. I was determined to unearth the extent of his deception. I began by delving into our finances. Nolan had always been vague about money, but now every statement, every transaction held potential clues. The deeper I dug, the more alarming the revelations. Secret credit cards, unpaid bills, and a trail of expenses that led straight to Clara. Nolan's hospital stay extended due to complications, giving me more time to investigate. Clara, it turned out, was the daughter of a local pharmacist known in our community. The brazenness of it all left me reeling. They hadn't just crossed paths, they had woven a web of lies right under my nose. One evening, as I sifted through bank statements, my phone rang. It was Nolan's doctor, asking me to come to the hospital immediately. "It's urgent," he said, his tone grave. Rushing to the hospital, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited. Nolan was conscious, looking more haggard than ever. But it was the doctor's words that echoed in my ears. "Mrs. Sullivan, your husband's condition is more serious than we thought. He's had a secondary complication, which has resulted in partial paralysis." Paralysis. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I stared at Nolan, searching for any sign of deceit. But his eyes, usually so full of cunning, now reflected fear and uncertainty. Nolan reached out with his functioning hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Avery, please." "I need you." I recoiled, the magnitude of his betrayal still fresh. "Need me? Like you needed Clara?" He flinched, the guilt written all over his face. "Avery, I made a mistake, but I'm paying for it, can't you see?" His plea was pathetic, a stark contrast to the confident, carefree man I had married. But there was no sympathy in me, only a burning desire for justice. "You made your bed, Nolan. Now lie in it," I said, my voice cold. As I turned to leave, Nolan's doctor pulled me aside. "Mrs. Sullivan, I understand this is difficult, but your husband requires care now more than ever." His words were a reminder of the complexity of my situation. Nolan, despite his faults, was now vulnerable, dependent. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that left me torn between my desire for revenge and a sense of duty. The drive home was a blur. My mind wrestled with the doctor's words and Nolan's newfound helplessness. It was a perverse form of karma, but it also opened a door. A door to a revenge that was subtle, yet powerful. I arrived home to an empty, silent house. The walls seemed to echo with the remnants of a life that once was. But within that silence, a plan began to form. Nolan's betrayal had cost him more than he realized. Now, it was time for him to understand the true price of his actions. A price that I would dictate, in a game where I held all the cards. The sterile smell of the hospital mingled with the scent of betrayal as I walked through its corridors. Nolan's condition had stabilized, but the paralysis remained. He looked up as I entered, a mix of hope and fear in his eyes. "Avery, I didn't expect you to come back," he murmured, his voice tinged with surprise. "I'm not here for pleasantries, Nolan. I'm here to settle things," I replied, my tone icy. Nolan attempted a weak smile, but it faltered. "I know I've messed up, but this paralysis, it's karma, isn't it?" "Karma? No, Nolan. This is just the beginning," I said, leaning in. "You've played your games, now it's my turn." His eyes widened, the realization of my intentions dawning on him. Avery, what are you planning? That's for me to know, but trust me, you'll pay for every lie, every deceit. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes, a fear that gave me a sense of power, a taste of revenge. As I turned to leave, a woman entered the room. Clara. She looked at me, her eyes betraying a flicker of guilt. Clara, this is my wife, Avery. Nolan introduced us, his voice strained. We've met, I said, my gaze fixed on Clara. I know all about your little affair. Clara's face flushed, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. Nolan and we didn't mean to hurt you. Hurt me? Oh, you've done much more than that, and now you'll both see the consequences, I said, my voice steely. Nolan interjected. Avery, please, let's talk about this. There's nothing left to talk about, I replied. You've made your bed, and now you'll lie in it, both of you. With that, I left them in the room, their stunned silence a satisfying conclusion to the encounter. The game had changed. Nolan and Clara were no longer the players. They were the pawns. As I walked away, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister Jess. Avery, we need to talk. I've found out something about Nolan. Curiosity piqued. I quickened my pace. Jess had always been resourceful, and if she had uncovered something new, it could be another piece in my revenge plan. We met at a nearby cafe, the bustle around us a stark contrast to the tension between us. What did you find out? I asked, eager yet apprehensive. Jess leaned in, her voice low. Nolan's accident wasn't just a coincidence. He was with Clara when it happened. The revelation hit me like a wave. The accident, the paralysis, it was all intertwined with his affair. And there's more, Jess continued. I've heard rumors that Nolan was planning to leave you, start a new life with Clara. Anger and betrayal churned within me, fueling my resolve. Nolan's deception ran deeper than I imagined. Thank you, Jess, I said, my mind racing with possibilities. This changes everything. As I left the cafe, a plan formed in my mind. Nolan and Clara thought they could rewrite the narrative, but I was the author of this story, and I would ensure it had a fitting end. Back home, the silence was deafening. It gave me space to think, to plan. Nolan's betrayal, now interwoven with his paralysis, had complicated things, but it also gave me an unexpected edge. The next day, I visited Nolan again. This time, my approach was different, more calculated. Nolan, I've been thinking, I started, feigning a tone of reconciliation. Maybe we can work things out, start afresh. He looked at me, hope flickering in his eyes. Really, Avery? I would love that. But first, I need honesty, total honesty, I said firmly. Nolan nodded eagerly. Anything, Avery, I swear. I leaned in closer. Tell me about the accident, the whole truth. He hesitated, then began. Clara and I were driving back from a weekend away. I lost control of the car. That's how the accident happened. I kept my expression neutral, hiding the storm inside. And Clara? She was fine. Just some minor bruises, he replied, his voice faltering. I stood up, my resolve hardening. Thank you for being honest, Nolan. As I left the room, Nolan's eyes followed me, filled with a mix of relief and confusion. Back home, I started putting my plan into action. I hired a private investigator, tasking him with digging deeper into Nolan's affair and the accident. The truth was my weapon, and I intended to wield it with precision. A few days later, the investigator provided his report. It was worse than I thought. Not only had Nolan been with Clara during the accident, but he had also been planning to leave me, to start anew with her. Fueled by this newfound information, I visited Nolan again, this time with a purpose. Nolan, I know about your plans with Clara, I said, watching him closely. His face paled. Avery, it's not like that. Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped. You were planning to abandon me, to start a life with her. Nolan's eyes darted around the room, a trapped animal looking for escape. Avery, please let me explain. No more lies, Nolan. I've heard enough, I said, cutting him off. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to divorce, and you're going to agree to my terms. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He knew he was cornered. As for Clara, she'll learn the truth. All of it. Your deceit, your plans, everything. Nolan's face crumpled. You wouldn't. Watch me, I said, my voice cold as ice. I left him there, his pleas echoing behind me. The tables had turned. Nolan, once the manipulator, was now at my mercy, and I had no intention of letting him off easy. The game of deception he had played was over. Now it was time for retribution, and I was ready to claim my victory. The day I filed for divorce felt like stepping into a new era. Armed with the truth and a resolve of steel, I walked into Nolan's hospital room with the divorce papers. "Nolan, these are the divorce papers," I announced, placing them on the bedside table. He looked at them, his face a mask of disbelief. "You're serious about this?" "Deadly serious," I replied. "You've played me for a fool long enough." Nolan's eyes searched mine, looking for a hint of mercy. "Avery, can't we talk about this? Maybe go to counseling, try to—" "No, Nolan, there's nothing left to salvage," I cut him off. "You've made your choices, and now you live with them." He sighed, a defeated man. "What do you want, Avery?" "Everything," I said bluntly. "The house, the savings, and no alimony for you. And Clara will know everything." His face crumbled. "You'll ruin me." "You did that yourself," I replied coldly. Nolan signed the papers, his hand trembling. It was a victory, but a hollow one. I had wanted justice, but standing there, watching the broken man before me, I felt no joy, only a deep sense of loss. As I turned to leave, Clara entered the room. Her eyes widened at the sight of the signed papers. "What's this?" she asked, confusion etching her features. "Our divorce," I said, meeting her gaze. "Nolan and I are done. He's all yours now." Clara looked from me to Nolan, her expression a mix of shock and realization. "You're leaving Avery for me?" Nolan remained silent, his eyes on the floor. "Clara, you were the other woman, but now you're the only woman. Congratulations," I said, the words laced with bitterness. I walked out, leaving them to their new reality. It was a reality they had chosen, built on lies and deceit. They deserved each other. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce was quick, Nolan too defeated to fight. The house, the savings, they were all mine. But they felt empty, remnants of a life I no longer wanted. I started over in a new apartment, with a new job. It was hard, starting from scratch, but it was honest, and it was mine. Through mutual friends, I heard about Nolan and Clara. Their relationship, built on the ruins of my marriage, was rocky, fraught with mistrust and guilt. They were a constant reminder to each other of how they had hurt me, and it ate away at them. As for me, I found peace in my solitude. I had loved Nolan, but that love had been based on a lie. Now I was learning to love myself, to find happiness in my independence. I realized that revenge hadn't brought me joy, but it had brought me clarity. I was stronger now, wiser, and ready to face whatever life threw at me. Nolan and Clara had each other, but I had something far more valuable, my freedom and my dignity. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Months had passed since the divorce, and life had settled into a new rhythm. The wounds were healing, slowly but surely. I had learned to embrace the quiet, finding solace in the small joys of everyday life. One crisp autumn evening, as I sipped tea on my balcony, my phone rang. It was Jess. "Avery, have you heard about Nolan?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "No, what happened?" I replied, a flicker of curiosity igniting within me. "He's left town, moved away with Clara. Apparently, they're trying to start over somewhere new," Jess explained. I paused, processing the news. Nolan and Clara leaving town was the final chapter in our shared story. A story that had ended not with dramatic confrontations, but with quiet departures. "Do you feel okay about it?" Jess asked gently. I smiled, more to myself than to her. "I'm okay, Jess. More than okay. I've moved on." We chatted for a while longer before hanging up. I sat there, looking out at the city lights, reflecting on the journey I had been through. Nolan's betrayal had shattered my world, but it had also rebuilt me. Stronger, more resilient. I had sought revenge, but in the process, I had found something far more valuable, my sense of self. I realized that true victory wasn't in seeing Nolan and Clara's downfall. It was in my rise from the ashes of our broken marriage. It was in the life I had built for myself, one that was authentically mine. The next morning I walked to work, the city bustling around me. I felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. My past with Nolan was just that, the past, and I was ready to embrace whatever the future held. As I reached my office, my colleague, Mark, greeted me with a warm smile. "Morning, Avery. You look good today." "Thanks, Mark. It's a new day," I replied, returning his smile. And it truly was. A new day, a new chapter, one where I was the author writing my own story, one filled with hope, strength, and endless possibilities.
I find myself entangled in a rather perplexing situation as I consider approaching your father regarding a troubling incident. related to a potential mugging of my own father. Indeed, suspicions have arisen concerning your father's involvement in this alleged mugging. Currently, he is situated at home. Would you be open to allowing me a brief audience with him for an inquiry? The police officer displayed a momentary sense of bewilderment in response to my request. His expression betrayed a subtle confusion. Despite this, he eventually agreed, stating, "Please let me see him." Consequently, I led the police officer into the confines of my home, unlocking the door to reveal my father's presence. Upon beholding my father, the police officer was visibly taken aback by the unexpected revelation. This incident transpired a few months ago, and as I reflect upon it, I feel compelled to share a bit more about myself. My name is David, and I am currently a fourth-year university student. Despite my aspirations to work for a prominent company, there lingers an unresolved dilemma within me. The decision revolves around whether or not to inherit my father's company. You see, my father holds the esteemed position of president at a modest factory. During my formative years, I harbored a desire to follow in my father's footsteps, aspiring to become a president like him. However, as I entered my rebellious phase, I distanced myself from this ambition, feeling a sense of embarrassment towards my father, perpetually adorned in work clothes, stained with oil. This sentiment persisted through my teenage years, and to some extent endures even now. As I matured into adulthood and engaged in part-time employment, my perspective on my father began to shift. I developed a newfound respect for his tireless work ethic, which sustained not only our family, but also supported numerous employees and their families. Yet, despite this growing admiration, an underlying sentiment lingered. A perception that the conventional salaryman, donned in a suit and toiling diligently, possessed a certain allure absent in my father's occupation. The narrative takes an intriguing turn when, during a shopping excursion with my father, we were unexpectedly hailed from behind. Turning together, my father and I encountered Richard, a contemporary of my father's from high school, dressed in a suit and on an external sales trip. Richard hailed from a prestigious corporation. In the course of our conversation, Richard casually inquired if my father had indeed assumed control of the family business. This revelation prompted Richard to express disdain for what he referred to as the dirty little factory managed by my father, emphasizing the incredulity that a high school graduate could rise to the position of president. Stunned by Richard's derogatory remarks, I found myself grappling with the realization that the factory in question was initiated by my grandfather, making my father the second-generation custodian of this familial legacy. I have long been aware that he had assumed control after graduating from high school. However, the revelation of a classmate mocking him caught me off guard. Richard maintained a silent smile while addressing my father. "So did you manage to expand your father's factory? You did mention during high school that you intended to take over the company and make it bigger." To this, my father admitted, "Unfortunately, I lacked the business acumen, and that dream didn't materialize." It seemed inevitable that I excelled in practical skills, but lagged behind in intellectual pursuits. Nonetheless, I felt relieved that our family didn't face financial ruin. Richard chuckled, hardly playfully, slapping my father on the shoulder. "Well, David, we'll catch up at the next reunion. I've got more work to do," he added before leaving. My father looked slightly uncomfortable, prompting me to redirect the conversation, suggesting a change of topic. My father proposed that we continue shopping. At that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father's work had been belittled without any response from me. The internal debate about whether to take over my father's company or pursue a career at a prestigious corporation leaned decisively toward the latter. A few weeks later, fate intervened as my father's Alumni Association event took place at the bar where I worked part-time. Despite the bustling atmosphere, I managed to serve at the table hosting my father's gathering, fulfilling my duties silently. I approached the room where the Alumni Association was held. My father warmly greeted me, introducing me as his son to those present. Though similar in appearance, I maintained a serious demeanor, responding awkwardly to the teasing of my father's inebriated classmates. Richard, seated nearby, noticed our interaction and remarked, "We met recently too, David, right? Are you planning to take over your father's small factory?" This question added another layer to my ongoing contemplation of my professional path. When I truthfully admitted to still contemplating my decision, an unpleasant alcoholic breath emanated from Richard, leaving me repulsed. Boisterously, he exclaimed, "Stop it. Your father's company is nothing extraordinary, David. You should consider working for a company like mine instead of inheriting such a lackluster business." Despite his inebriated state, Richard proceeded to boast about his professional achievements, narrating a career history that began as an assistant but now claimed the head of accounting position. A sense of unease crept over me as I sensed discrepancies in his narrative. I sensed that something was amiss, but I chose to keep my concerns to myself, wary of potential complications that might arise from challenging him. My father, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by Richard's inebriation, and in fact found the situation amusing. With a lighter mood due to his own inebriation, he asked Richard about changes in his department since their last encounter a few weeks ago, questioning the sudden shift from sales to accounting. My father caught Richard off guard. Eventually, Richard admitted to an abrupt transfer, asserting that sales wasn't his forte. However, my father pointed out the incongruity in Richard's story, revealing that the company Richard proudly spoke of had actually been absorbed by a foreign corporation with its accounting department relocated overseas. Laughter erupted among the party attendees as Richard, now embarrassed and regretful, attempted to save face but ultimately decided to leave the gathering with heavy footsteps. Witnessing my father's ability to address the uncomfortable truth that others had noticed but hesitated to mention, I found a sense of pride in his candor even in his intoxicated state. As half a year passed since that incident, my internal dilemma regarding whether or not to take over my father's company only intensified. The confusion deepened with each passing day, leaving me uncertain about the path I should pursue. One day, while relaxing at home, the intercom interrupted my contemplation. In the absence of my mother, I answered the door to find a visitor in uniformed clothes identifying themselves as a police officer. Surprised and apprehensive, I responded with a stiff voice, wondering if I had inadvertently committed some transgression. The police officer then brought up a purse-snatching incident, expressing a need to inquire about the matter with my father. The mention of such an incident left me puzzled, and I began to wonder about the unfolding events that seemed to add further layers of complexity to my already tumultuous life. Indeed, the enigmatic cloud of suspicion had descended upon my father, casting a shadow over our tranquil abode. The air thick with uncertainty, I found myself face to face with a stern-faced police officer bearing the weight of an accusation that seemed inconceivable, inquiring about my father's whereabouts. The officer, with an air of professionalism, sought confirmation of his presence within our home. The exchange took an unexpected turn as the officer, grappling with the perplexity in my tone, requested to lay eyes upon my father. Navigating the corridors of my dwelling, I ushered the law enforcement representative into the sacred space of our familial sanctuary, a room adorned with a Buddhist altar and a photograph capturing the essence of my late father's spirit. In the ensuing revelation, I divulged the heartbreaking truth to the officer that my father had met an untimely demise in a tragic traffic accident. The officer, displaying empathy amid the unfolding tragedy, extended condolences for the loss. Yet my quest for justice and clarity persisted, and I sought to discern the source of this bewildering accusation that had stained my father's reputation. However, the officer, bound by the constraints of confidentiality, refrained from divulging the identity of the accuser. Apologies flowed from the lips of the officer as he departed, leaving me grappling with an unsettling sense of confusion and the nagging question of who had leveled such a grave accusation against my departed father. Days unfolded like the pages of a mystery novel, each chapter bringing a new layer of complexity to the narrative. As I took on the responsibilities left in the void by my father's absence, immersed in the daily operations of my father's factory, I witnessed my mother's valiant attempts to fill the void left by his absence. However, the weight of age limited her contributions. Amidst the mechanical symphony of the factory floor, the harmony was shattered by the sudden intrusion of Richard, a character bearing an aura of accusation and vengeance. His booming voice reverberated through the cacophony, demanding restitution for a perceived transgression committed by my father. Caught in the crossfire of accusations, I attempted to reason with Richard, asserting my father's innocence in the face of the alleged purse-snatching incident. The atmosphere within the factory shifted, with the ceaseless hum of machinery giving way to hushed whispers and curious glances exchanged among the employees. Richard, however, remained resolute in his pursuit of justice, convinced of my father's guilt. His insistence echoed through the industrial expanse, causing a disturbance that transcended the confines of the factory. Frustration surged within me as I defended my father's honor, challenging Richard's assertions and questioning the veracity of his claims. As the confrontation unfolded, Richard revealed the purported timeline of the incident, fixing it 2 weeks prior. A murmur rippled through the gathered employees, their confusion palpable. My persistent queries regarding the accuracy of the timeline only fueled Richard's frustration, intensifying his vocal protestations. In the midst of the tumult, Richard's disparaging remarks about my father's workplace and colleagues added fuel to the emotional fire. Yet the gravest affront was his attempt to pin the blame for the alleged purse snatching squarely on my deceased father's shoulders. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow as Richard persisted in his accusations, seemingly oblivious to the irrefutable truth, illuminating the fact that my father, the subject of this tumultuous ordeal, had met his end in a tragic traffic accident a month prior. The realization hung heavy in the air. A poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the injustice faced even in death. Richard appeared as though he had ingested an entire pigeonhole, and with an amused expression he muttered, "Ha." Undeterred, I pressed on, questioning the incredulous accusation he had just hurled in my father's direction. How could my father snatch purses when he passed away just 1 month ago? Perhaps there wasn't any purse snatching at all, I asserted. However, my skepticism wasn't merely based on recent events. It was rooted in the knowledge I had gained during our class reunion. It came to light that Richard, since his school days, had been a habitual liar. This revelation occurred during the reunion, where I discovered that his dishonesty had deep roots. Moreover, it turned out that Richard had harbored a long-standing jealousy toward my father, dating back to their school days. This envy sprouted from a romantic rivalry. The girl Richard liked had chosen my father over him. This petty jealousy had fueled an unnecessary rivalry, leaving me unable to forgive Richard for attempting to tarnish my deceased father's reputation with baseless accusations. As Richard persistently asserted his unfounded claims, an interjection from another direction pierced the air. Someone emphatically shouted, "Your president wouldn't do something like that." Our president is a serious person who walks around with honesty, teaching technology, and encouraging independence. He always considers the well-being of the staff and business partners, prioritizing that over profits. The voices praising my father began to multiply, and I felt a mix of emotions, including shame for once thinking my father's work was embarrassing. Amidst the rising tide of support for my father, Richard, trembling and tearful, found himself on the receiving end of an unexpected defense of my father's character by the factory workers. It was a poignant moment that revealed my father's true standing among his peers. In the aftermath, I dealt the decisive blow to Richard by pledging to consult with the police over his false accusations against my father. Overwhelmed and unable to counter the mounting evidence, Richard raised his voice and fled the factory. True to my word, I reported Richard's false accusations to the police, supported by a recording of his statements made by a thoughtful staff member during the heated confrontation. The presence of irrefutable evidence expedited the legal process, leading to Richard's swift apprehension. His attempt to frame my father backfired, transforming his lie into a crime for which he paid a penance in jail. The relief I felt was palpable, knowing that Richard had received the comeuppance he deserved. Days later, Richard's supposed wife sought redemption and arrived at our house with a gift box, apologizing to me and my mother. She confirmed that Richard's actions were a result of the wounds he suffered at the reunion. As it turned out, Richard, once an elite employee, had been fired from his company, struggling to secure new employment. His lies about being an elite crumbled under scrutiny, especially when his inebriated confessions exposed the inconsistencies, ultimately leading to his own embarrassment and downfall. As he grappled with mounting resentment towards my father, an insidious plan began to take root in Richard's mind. A sinister plot to frame him. The sheer audacity of Richard's intention left me utterly disgusted, particularly when I learned of his preposterous rationale for resorting to lies and deceit. Interestingly, it appeared that Richard's wife shared my sentiments. She confided in me, expressing her profound disappointment in Richard's actions and revealing her intention to initiate divorce proceedings. The revelation further underscored the gravity of Richard's transgressions. Adding to the complexity of the situation was the fact that Richard, seemingly devoid of any familial ties, had no children waiting for him upon potential release from jail. This realization cast a somber light on his future prospects. Upon my graduation from college, I found myself at a pivotal juncture. The recent passing of my father weighed heavily on my mind, and I harbored concerns about the state of the company he left behind. Motivated by a dual sense of responsibility and an unshakable desire to honor the legacy of those who had supported my father during Richard's malicious lies, I made the decision to step into the role of leading the company. The decision was multifaceted. Firstly, I felt a genuine concern for the effective management of the company in the wake of my father's demise. Secondly, the impassioned voices of the staff members who had steadfastly defended my father resonated within me. Their loyalty and dedication fueled my determination to become a president who would be both loved and respected by the staff. This incident became a transformative moment for me. Armed with a degree in business administration, I recognized my ability to manage the aspects of the company that my father struggled with. However, I also acknowledged my need to learn from the dedicated staff members who possessed valuable insights into the technological facets of the business. The staff members, driven by a collective sense of loyalty and compassion, willingly imparted their knowledge to me, often emphasizing that their efforts were for the sake of my father. Their anecdotes painted a vivid picture of my father's greatness, and with each story, I grew more appreciative of the man he was. Confronted with the realization of my father's true worth, I found myself expressing remorse for not having recognized his greatness while he was alive. Speaking to his portrait after work, I couldn't help but feel a sense of shame as I looked at my oil-stained self. Yet I began to view those stains as tangible evidence of my father's tireless work ethic. Determined to honor my father's legacy, I pledged to become a president who mirrored his virtues. I was resolute in my commitment to make his dream of expanding the town factory, a legacy passed down since my grandfather's generation, a reality. Addressing his portrait once again, this time with newfound determination, I spoke of my aspirations and felt an ethereal connection, as if my father were smiling down upon me. From that moment forward, I dedicated myself to working tirelessly, aspiring to become a president worthy of my father's legacy, and realizing his dream of expanding the family's factory that had endured through generations. Life had its own simple way for me. My name is Julie, and at 35, you would find me in the local library. It wasn't exciting, but it was my place. The books were my friends, and the dusty shelves were where I felt at home. I liked staying out of the spotlight and being in the background. I lived in a small town where everyone knew each other's business. My days were mostly the same. Wake up, go to work, and then back to my small apartment. It was filled with used furniture and lots of books. I didn't really go out much, and that was okay with me, or at least that's what I told myself. Then Jack walked into my life. It was a day like any other. He wanted a book, something different, he said. He had a friendly smile and a warm voice that felt like sunshine on a cloudy day. "Hey, could you help me find a book?" "I'm feeling adventurous," he said, smiling with his eyes. "Sure, what type of book are you looking for?" I asked, adjusting my glasses and trying not to stare at him too much. "I don't know, surprise me," he answered, smiling in a way that showed he liked this small challenge. That was the start of everything. We began talking more and more. At first, it was about books, but then we started talking about our lives. Jack was different. He really listened, making me feel heard for the first time in a while. One day, he came in with a determined look. "You know, Julie, you're the most interesting person I've met here. Why do you hide in here all day?" he asked, leaning on the counter with a playful look in his eyes. I laughed, a sound that felt odd to me. Where else would I go? "This town isn't exactly full of excitement," I said. Jack quickly replied, "Maybe you just need someone to explore it with. How about dinner tonight?" My treat. I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention. "I don't know, Jack." "Come on, what's the worst that could happen? You spend an evening out with a guy who enjoys your book recommendations. Plus, I promise to make it worth your while. You can show me this hidden gem of a town," he encouraged, his confidence catching. Against my better judgment, I agreed. "Okay, sure, but no fancy places." "I don't like all that fuss," I said. Jack smiled brightly. "I'll pick you up at 9. Where's something comfortable?" That night changed everything. Jack showed me parts of the town I'd never noticed, even though I've lived here all my life. He made me laugh, a real deep laugh that I didn't know I could. He listened to my stories, my dreams and my fears, never making me feel unimportant. As we walked back to my apartment, he stopped and looked at me seriously. "Julie, I know we've only just met, but there's something about you. You're genuine, and in a world full of fakes, that's rare." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. Jack, He cut me off gently, placing a finger on my lips. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I see you, Julie. I see who you are, and I like what I see." Jack was always the best part of my day, making everything brighter with his care. He made me feel seen, calling me beautiful, kind, and smart, things I hardly believed about myself. His warmth made the idea of forever not just possible but desirable. When he proposed, it felt like a dream. "Marry me, Julie." "I can't imagine my life without you," he said, his eyes sincere. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, feeling excited and a bit shocked. But before we got caught up in wedding planning, there was one important step. We had to meet his parents. Jack had warned me, "My folks have high standards for who I bring home, but don't worry, they're going to love you once they see how amazing you are." Though his words were meant to comfort me, my nerves were still there. I was very nervous before meeting Jack's parents. I searched my closet for something simple but nice to wear, but it felt like a difficult task. Jack, on the other hand, was completely relaxed. He seemed almost uninterested, as if he wasn't worried at all about how the meeting would go. "You're overthinking it, Julie. Just wear what you're comfortable in," he told me casually, which only made me more nervous. When the day came, I chose a simple blue dress, hoping it was the right choice. As we drove to his parents' house, Jack seemed more interested in the music on the radio than in the meeting. "You sure they're going to like me?" I asked him, looking for some reassurance. "They'll come around. Just be yourself," he replied, not really paying attention. I was anxious as we walked up to the door of Jack's childhood home. I remembered his warnings and felt scared about what was coming. When the door opened, Jack's parents were hard to read. The dinner that followed felt like a test. They asked me many questions, making it feel more like an interrogation than a casual conversation. "So, Julie, Jack tells us you work at a library. Do you see yourself doing that long term?" his father asked, sounding like he didn't think much of my job. I tried to answer confidently. "I love working there. It's fulfilling in a way I can't quite describe," I said, hoping my passion would impress them. Jack was unusually quiet the whole time, offering little help as I dealt with their tough questions and subtle criticisms. It felt like I was fighting a battle alone, with Jack just watching on. The drive home was silent. I was not only upset about how the evening went, but also disappointed in Jack's lack of support. "I thought you said they'd warm up to me," I said, my voice filled with hurt. Jack just shrugged, which frustrated me. "Give it time, Julie. They just need to get to know you better," he said, but his words didn't really comfort me. After a few more dinners that felt just as uncomfortable, it was clear Jack's parents didn't like me much. They seemed to think I was after their money, which was not true at all. I was never interested in Jack's money. In fact, I barely knew about it until he mentioned it one day, saying his parents are a bit old-fashioned, worrying about money and status. One night, Jack came home looking serious. "Babe, we need to talk," he said, avoiding my eyes. I felt a knot in my stomach. "What's wrong?" I asked. "It's my parents," he started, finally looking at me. "They're insisting we sign a prenup." The word felt strange and bitter. "Jack, you know I don't care about your money, right?" He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I know, and I don't care about it either, not when it comes to us." But they're adamant. They think it'll protect both of us or something. I was hurt, I won't lie. It felt like they were expecting our relationship to fail. But I loved Jack more than I cared about his parents' approval or some silly agreement. "Fine," I said, sharper than I meant to. "Let's sign it and be done with it. Your money, my money, whatever. I don't care. I just want you." Jack looked relieved, and part of me hated that he felt that way. "Thank you, babe. I hate this as much as you do. It's just a piece of paper. It won't change anything between us." So we signed the thing. Some lawyer his parents knew drew it up, making sure neither of us could touch the other's stuff if things went bad. It felt like signing a declaration of distrust before we even began, but I pushed those thoughts away. I was in love, and love was supposed to conquer all, right? Our wedding was simple, just how I wanted it. Just a few close friends, an intimate ceremony, and the promise of forever. I moved into Jack's place shortly after. It was a nice house, nothing too fancy, but it felt worlds away from my old apartment. Jack's parents lived nearby, which meant surprise visits that seemed more like inspections. Life with Jack started like a fairy tale, but it didn't take long for the shine to wear off, showing the harsh reality underneath. The change didn't happen overnight, but the signs slowly crept in, eroding what we had built. His mother, Megan, was the first crack in our perfect picture. She dropped by unannounced, scanning the house as if taking inventory. "Remember, this is Jack's house. Everything here is his," she reminded me. I kept my cool, replying, "I'm well aware, Megan. I'm not here for your son's things." "I love him," I said, but she just scoffed. "Love doesn't pay the bills, dear. Just remember, if you ever leave, you leave with what you came with. Nothing." One day, she walked around the house, pointing out everything. "See this couch? It's Jack's. That painting? Also Jack's. Remember, dear, in case things go bad, you have no claim over any of it." She told me with a nasty kind of sweetness in her voice. It seemed like she enjoyed reminding me of my place in their world. Jack's father, Alexander, wasn't any better. He and Megan acted like they owned our house. Not just visiting, they demanded coffee the moment they walked in, criticized how I made it too weak or too strong, and then sat in front of the TV expecting me to serve them. "Grab us some chips, will you? And maybe wash those clothes piling up in the corner," Alexander would say without even looking at me. The worst part was that Jack never stood up for me. He'd laugh along with them, adding his own comments. "Yeah, she's still learning how to do things right around here. Give her time." I felt like I was losing my mind. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone else, someone cruel and dismissive. "Do you even hear yourself? How can you let them treat me like this?" I'd confront Jack after his parents left. "Babe, they're just set in their ways. You know how old people are," he'd say, shrugging it off as if I was the one overreacting. "They don't mean anything by it. Plus, you know we're on their dime. Can't bite the hand that feeds, right?" That line hit me like a slap in the face. So that was it. I was just the freeloader, the girl who married into their little empire and had to play by their rules or get out. My job at the library, which I loved, was a joke to them, just another reason for them to look down on me. The days all blurred together, each one just like the last, until that unremarkable Tuesday when everything changed. I was at work shelving books when I felt a sharp pain in my stomach, doubling me over. It wasn't just stress. It was something more, something worse. The next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils. Lying in that hospital bed, I couldn't help but think how this was a new low. Alone, in pain, and not a single message or call from Jack. When I thought things couldn't get any worse, there was a knock at the door. A man I never expected was standing there. He wore a suit and held a briefcase, looking completely out of place in my sterile hospital room. "Are you Julie Bowen?" he asked. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" I replied, my voice weak and tired from the pain and constant letdowns. "I'm Scott Atkins, a notary. I have something important to discuss with you," he said. His tone was formal, but there was something in his eyes that made me want to listen. I nodded for him to continue, curious despite everything. "It's about your great-uncle, Brandon Sanderson. He recently passed away, and you are his only heir, Julie. He left you an inheritance." His words didn't make sense at first. "Are you sure you have the right person?" "I haven't seen him for 18 years, I said. Scott nodded. Quite sure. He was a private man, but he always remembered you and wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Lying in the hospital bed, feeling a mix of confusion and excitement, I watched as the notary got ready to explain my great-uncle's will. He cleared his throat, opened his briefcase, and spread out the documents in front of him. Julie, your great-uncle was a wealthy man with fine taste. He left you a significant inheritance. We're not just talking about money here, though there's plenty of that, $40 million to be exact. Scott began, his voice calm and factual. $40 million, I repeated, my voice cracking. That's right, he continued, unfazed by my shock. But there's more. You're also inheriting shares in several large companies. These are not small investments. We're talking about major stakes in some of the most stable and profitable companies out there. My mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of what he was saying. Owning parts of companies I had only heard about on the news seemed like a fantasy. And there's property, Scott went on, flipping through the papers. An old large house in one of the most prestigious areas. It's not just any house, Julie. It's a mansion with history, acres of land, and it's all yours now. I tried to imagine the house, the kind of place I had only seen in movies. It was overwhelming, to say the least. Don't forget about the antique car, he added with a slight smile, as if expecting my reaction. A classic, fully restored, and in mint condition. It's a collector's dream. I laughed, feeling like this was all too strange. An antique car, too. What am I going to do with that? I barely drive as it is, I said. Scott's smile got bigger. Well, it's yours to do with as you please. Maybe take it for a spin now, and then he continued. And then there's the furniture and paintings inside the house. They're genuine antiques, some of them centuries old. Your great-uncle had a taste for fine things. The room seemed to shrink, and the air got heavier as I tried to understand everything he was saying. So I've inherited a fortune, a company, a mansion, an antique car, and a collection of art and furniture. That's unbelievable. It's all yours, Julie. Your great-uncle wanted to make sure you were well taken care of. It seems he saw something special in you. Special? I felt anything but special lying in a hospital bed after the worst few months of my life. Yet here I was, suddenly a multi-millionaire, trusted with a legacy I didn't even know existed. Thank you, Mr. Atkins. This is a lot to take in. I don't even know where to start, I admitted, feeling grateful, disbelief, and a huge sense of responsibility. We'll take it one step at a time, he assured me. I'm here to help you through the whole process. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Jack calling for the first time in days. Ignoring it, I turned back to Scott. What happens now? We'll need to handle some paperwork, but the inheritance is yours. Your life is about to change, Julie. And change it did. After the unexpected windfall, Jack and his folks seemed to change their attitude. Their daily hospital visits felt like scenes from a cheesy movie. Jack, who hadn't bothered to check on me before, was now constantly by my side, fussing over my blanket with a worried look. How are you feeling today, love? He'd ask, his voice dripping with sweetness that didn't reach his eyes. His mother, Megan, was even more over the top, if possible. Darling, I'm going to cook your favorite lasagna when you get back home. Just you wait, she said, her smile wide, but not quite genuine. It was all too much, too sudden, yet I played along, smiling weakly and thanking them for their care. But suspicion gnawed at me, urging me to look beyond their actions. So one day, after their routine visit, I gathered the strength to slip out of my bed and follow them. My heart pounded with every step as I hid behind a corner. I overheard them as they showed their true colors, not knowing I was listening. Their laughter was loud and harsh. Can you believe how easy it is? She's terribly naive. She completely fooled, Jack said, laughing. Megan, always planning, spoke with a sharp tone. Make sure she has a baby with you, Jack. Once she does, she'll never be able to leave. And then we'll really have control over her and her fortune. Their cruel and cold words didn't shock me. I felt disappointed, yes, but not surprised. They had shown who they really were, and I was done pretending otherwise. Silently, I returned to my hospital bed, their mocking words igniting a determination within me. They saw me only as a way to secure their future, but I was done playing their game. Back at home after being discharged, I felt like a stranger in what was supposed to be my own place. Jack and his parents were there, pretending to be concerned. The air was tense with unspoken expectations. Jack broke the silence with a hint of sweetness, but mostly greed. Babe, you're home. How are you feeling? We've been so worried about you. Ignoring the knot in my throat, I looked him straight in the eye. I'm feeling better, thanks. But we need to talk, all of us, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. Megan, ever the actress, stepped forward, her hands clasped as if praying. Of course, dear. We're here for you, whatever you need. It was now or never. I took a deep breath and made my intentions clear. I'm filing for divorce, Jack. And before you ask, no, you won't see a dime of my inheritance. The room went silent, the atmosphere drained as if by a vacuum. Jack's face went pale, his facade slipping to reveal his panic. Divorce? But why? I thought we were happy. Happy? The word tasted bitter. You and your mom and your dad have made my life miserable. You've treated me like a servant, not a wife. And now suddenly you're concerned about me because I have something you want. Jack struggled for words, but Megan quickly intervened. This is nonsense. We've always treated you like family. You're imagining things, dear. I rolled my eyes, tired of their lies. I took out the prenuptial agreement from my bag and showed it to him. This saved me. You thought you could fool me, but I'm not the naive girl you thought I was. Alexander, who had been silent until now, finally spoke with a mix of anger and defeat. You'll regret this. We're your family. No, you were never my family. A family doesn't treat someone like dirt and then become nice when money is involved. I'm done here. Moving into my own small and cozy apartment was a breath of fresh air. I desperately needed it. It wasn't just a new place to live. It was my declaration of independence, my fresh start. The phone calls started almost immediately. Jack, sounding desperate, was the first to call. Julie, please, you've got to come back. We can work this out. I know we can. His pleas didn't affect me. Jack, it's over. I'm not coming back. You need to accept that, I said firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. Soon after, Megan called her voice a toxic mix of anger and guilt-tripping. Ungrateful. After everything we've done for you, you owe us Julie. You're making a huge mistake. Owe you for what, Megan? For making me feel like a burden? No, I don't owe you anything. Goodbye. Hanging up on her felt like shedding a heavy weight, a final cut from the ties that bound me to a life of misery. The divorce was a relief, a clean break from a past that had threatened to consume me. Through friends, I heard about the fallout between Jack and his parents. Ironically, the prenuptial agreement they had insisted on was now the source of their family strife. With my great-uncle's inheritance securely in my name, I found purpose and generosity. A significant portion went to charities that mattered to me, causes that would make a difference in the world. But it was the bookstore that became my passion project, a cozy haven for lovers of old and rare books. It was my way of reconnecting with the world on my terms. My journey hadn't been easy, fraught with challenges and hard decisions. But standing in my bookstore, surrounded by the stories of countless others, I knew I had found my happy ending. It wasn't just about moving on from Jack and his family's manipulation. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I loved. Here's to new beginnings, I toasted to myself one quiet evening after closing up shop. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel, filled with possibilities and the promise of newfound happiness. Is Grandpa behaving himself well? Sort of. He injured his leg. Old people can be such a nuisance. I wish they'd think about those of us who have to take care of them. That's not a nice way to say it. Patricia, it's fine. He's already declining quite a bit. I can't handle the fuss of old people, but you're used to it, so you'll be fine. The other day, my husband's grandfather, Michael, fell in a garden and injured his leg. It's not a serious injury, but he's already 82 years old. Because of his age, we're having him rest in bed just to be safe so it doesn't get worse. My mother-in-law won't even go near him, let alone take care of him. I'm Emily, 30 years old. I got married 3 years ago and live with my husband Daniel's family. My husband was my boss at the company where I worked, a company founded by his grandfather. When I joined 8 years ago, my father-in-law was already the president, and my grandfather-in-law was the chairman. But back then, the grandfather was still handling all the important tasks and responsibilities of the company. 2 years ago, when Grandpa turned 80, he remained chairman but handed over most of the public duties to my father-in-law. Michael, you've worked hard all this time. Now leave the company matters to Christopher and take it easy, my mother-in-law said with a smile, but her words sounded sarcastic to me. Grandfather-in-law is a bit stubborn, but a fair and kind person with a good reputation. In contrast, my father-in-law seemed somewhat immature, never expressing his opinions clearly and utterly unreliable compared to Grandpa. And he always does whatever my mother-in-law says. My grandmother-in-law has already passed away, and I never met her. My husband and I started dating when we worked together on the same product planning team. 3 years after I joined the company, my husband, energetically leading the team, seemed reliable to me, though a bit self-righteous. Maybe I felt that way because I lost my father early and grew up with just my mother. My mother also passed away from illness 2 years ago, and now I have no family other than my in-laws. Shortly after I got married, my mother fell ill and needed care, so I quit my job to take care of her. The fact that my husband's family didn't object was probably due to a single comment from Grandpa. It's only natural to take care of the mother who raised you alone. Don't worry and take good care of her. Thanks to that, I was able to be by my mother's side every day for a year without financial worries until she passed away. My mother-in-law seemed a bit dissatisfied, but I was truly grateful. However, since Grandpa handed over the company to my father-in-law, everyone's attitudes towards him have gradually changed. No one here listens to his opinions as much, and I can't shake the feeling that they're treating him carelessly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but watching my mother-in-law and husband's behavior, I can't help but feel that way. My father-in-law's attitude is non-committal, but it feels like he's ignoring Grandpa as if he's no longer needed since he's practically retired. Watching my in-laws' behavior, I feel somewhat angry. Hey, don't you think your attitude, Patricia, and yours too, is a bit cold towards Grandpa? So what's the big deal? Grandpa tries to talk to you, and you barely respond. You don't even try to help them. Like I have time to deal with old people. You can take care of Grandpa. You're the one with the free time. You don't have to talk like that. Quiet. I'm tired from work. Don't nag me about unnecessary things. This is how it goes. No matter, they won't listen to me. My grandfather-in-law doesn't say anything to his family about this. Now I'm the only one who talks to my grandfather-in-law at home. Grandpa, the weather is nice today. Shall we go for a little walk outside? Your leg seems to be healing well, and I think it will be good rehabilitation. Thank you. Let's go out for a bit. The two of us went to the park where there were several families with children playing around. My grandfather-in-law looked at this scene with joy. Christopher and Daniel enjoy times like that too. I was busy with work and couldn't take care of the children much. Maybe that's why I couldn't raise Christopher and Daniel properly. My grandfather-in-law said with a slightly sad face, almost like he was talking to himself. I think about how everyone can be kinder to my grandfather-in-law, but I can't come up with a good idea. But then my in-law suggested building a house for my grandfather-in-law. This house is over 50 years old, right? The layout is bad. It's hard to use. But instead of spending money on repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location. A new house. Michael is getting older, and it's good that he only got injured last time, but we never know what will happen. So let's make the house barrier-free so we won't have trouble if care is needed. I see. We can even put Michael's room in the middle so everyone can take care of him easily. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Right, so it's settled then. And Michael, at the cost if it's a house for all of us, I'll take care of it. Talk to Mr. Jones about the money. Typical Michael. Thank you. We appreciate it. My mother-in-law smiled happily. It seems to me that they only flatter him when they want money. But if everyone takes care of my grandfather-in-law after moving to the new house, I thought there could be nothing better. Mr. Jones is the company's in-house counsel and also manages my grandfather-in-law's personal assets. My grandfather-in-law liked his character and made him in-house counsel. And it's been nearly 30 years. He is 58 now, and a person my grandfather-in-law trusts the most. I've met him several times, and he seems to be a very honest person. He always cares about my grandfather-in-law's health, and sometimes I think he's more like a son than his real sons. Having such people around my grandfather-in-law makes me feel a little relieved. I wasn't informed about the details of the house being built, but my mother-in-law seemed very cheerful, and the three of them were looking at interior design magazines, and discussing various things seemed to be going smoothly. Then something unexpected happened. It was revealed that my grandfather-in-law had a debt of $1,820. Wait, what's this about $1,820,000? I exclaimed. My grandfather-in-law had become a co-signer for a loan for a friend's company, but that company was in trouble, and the debt had become my grandfather-in-law's responsibility. Wait, they're not going to take the house. It's under construction, are they? Since the contract has already been completed, and as Patricia said, it's in the president's name, so it's fine. My mother-in-law seemed relieved at those words. Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad we did it my way, listening to that conversation. I learned for the first time that the house was in my father-in-law's name, even though my grandfather-in-law had paid for it. Putting it in my father-in-law's name seemed just like something my mother-in-law would do. I also wondered why they didn't think of giving up the house to help repay the debt. Hey, this debt is Michael's fault and has nothing to do with us or the company, right? Well, it was signed in Michael's name. All good then, there's no problem. I couldn't understand what was good about it, but since my grandfather-in-law didn't say anything during that conversation, I didn't intervene either. After all, it's not an amount I could handle. A few days later, my grandfather-in-law's behavior began to change gradually. "Grandpa, what would you like to eat for lunch?" "Who are you calling Grandpa? I'm only 50. You have no right to call me that." "Huh, sorry, Emily, right." I was lost in thought. At first, I thought he was just deep in thought, and when it happened repeatedly, I began to feel uneasy. "Patricia, what are you doing? Where's my meal, Grandpa?" "I'm Emily. Patricia is your daughter-in-law. You ate your meal earlier, didn't you?" "Are you trying to starve me?" I wondered if my grandfather-in-law's condition was triggered by the $1,820,000 debt, and seeing that none of his family members were trying to help him might have been a double shock. I tried to persuade my grandfather-in-law to go to the hospital, but he adamantly refused. He might not want to admit that he could have dementia. I didn't want to force him, but I felt helpless on my own. I consulted my husband, but he simply brushed it off, saying it had nothing to do with him. My mother-in-law wasn't any help either, so I turned to my father-in-law as the only option. Yeah, I heard from Patricia. "Daniel, they think it might be dementia. Can you go to the hospital with us?" I asked him. "But it's not that bad yet, right? If we go to the hospital, others will find out my father has dementia," he responded. "There are good medications now that can slow the progression. Well, there's no need to rush. Let's watch him a little longer. Emily is here, so they'll be fine, right?" I couldn't help but feel frustrated by their lack of concern. I couldn't depend on them. "Grandpa, let's go to the hospital. Let's see you properly examined," I urged. "Who are you? Where are you planning to take me?" "You're up to no good," he retorted. I felt tears welling up, seeing how stubborn my once kind grandfather-in-law had become, but my mother-in-law just laughed amusedly. "Even if he was the chairman, it's over for him now." "But now everything, even the company, is all Christopher," she remarked casually. "Patricia, Grandpa isn't completely unaware. He's listening to everything. He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering, dribbling. Just thinking about it gives me chills. He's nothing but a nuisance now," I protested. "How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for the family all of his life." My mother-in-law's words made me both angry and sad, but my grandfather-in-law just smiled. "See, this old man doesn't understand anything," she added, laughing. I was furious at my mother-in-law's callousness, but soon the new house would be ready. Perhaps things might change once we move there. Since it's a house that Grandpa built, the family might show some gratitude and be kind to him. I couldn't completely abandon that faint hope. And 2 months later, the house was finally built. For days, I had been compelled to pack my in-laws' and husband's belongings, while my father-in-law's and my own items remained mostly untouched. Even when I attempted to organize my things, my in-laws and husband kept assigning me tasks, preventing any progress. However, I reasoned it would be okay to relocate the smaller items later, since this house wasn't disappearing on moving day. After transferring most of the belongings, I went to call my father-in-law, but my husband intercepted me. "Ah, you and Grandpa can stay here," he announced. "What? You can stay in his house? We don't need any extra baggage in the new house. In other words, you and Grandpa will live here from now on, and I'll give you Grandpa's debt too. Well, you can at least be a housekeeper. Hey, let's go." "Yeah, I'm coming." Good luck with all the debt repayment and live-in care. My in-laws cheerfully departed, leaving me stunned. For a while, I couldn't comprehend what had just occurred. Were we abandoned? Not just me, but also my grandfather-in-law. Only they would reside in the new house. It took me some time to grasp because it was beyond my imagination that someone could be so cruel. How should I explain this to my grandfather-in-law? Slowly, I made my way back to the rear room. I didn't mind caring for my grandfather-in-law at all. That was my intention from the start. As I timidly prepared to call out to him, noticing his back facing me, he seemed to sense my presence and turned around. "Have they gone already?" His expression as he uttered those words looked entirely different from what it had been just months ago. To be honest, he seemed like a different person. I wondered if a new symptom had emerged, but the next moment, my grandfather-in-law smiled, and his subsequent words caught me off guard. As I was talking to my grandfather-in-law, Mr. Jones came. "Chairman, have you finished getting rid of the unnecessary staff?" "Yes, it's all done. Let's go, shall we?" "Huh, where are we going?" "Of course, to the new house." I left the house where I had been residing, guided by my grandfather-in-law. Without fully understanding what was unfolding, the following month, my mother-in-law and husband bombarded me with countless calls. My grandfather-in-law declared he wouldn't entertain their calls anymore, but I answered my husband's call due to the looming divorce. "Hey, Emily, is Grandpa with you?" When I went to the old house, it was up for sale. "It's not worth $1,820,000, so you can't repay the debt. Is that why you did that?" My husband interrogated. "What do you mean? Put Grandpa on." "Dad said he can't get in touch at all. That forgetful old man has done something outrageous." I knew what he was referring to, but I wanted to hear my husband's side of the story. Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Thanks to that, the executive director became the largest shareholder, and a shareholders' meeting and board meeting were held, resulting in Dad being dismissed as president. But the executive director is well-liked. Maybe Grandpa thought it was better to hand over the company to him. The executive director must have deceived the old man into selling the stocks. This is invalid. You seem to be misunderstanding something, but Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he seems more coherent than before. Until that moving day, I genuinely believed that my grandfather-in-law had dementia. It appears that my grandfather-in-law harbored suspicions from the moment my mother-in-law mentioned building a house to live with him, so he devised a plan. He fainted to Mina to observe how my in-laws and husband would react. As anticipated, they revealed their true colors one after another. In the end, they left my grandfather-in-law and me behind. I struggled to contain my laughter because everything unfolded exactly as I had expected. My grandfather-in-law then said, "I found myself surprised, relieved, and slightly conflicted. To deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies." My grandfather-in-law chuckled. It seemed he had been receiving regular updates on the company from the executive director and Mr. Jones. With my grandfather-in-law gone, my father-in-law and husband acted as they pleased, self-righteous, and completely ignoring the opinions of the employees, often entertaining at the company's expense. Eventually, my grandfather-in-law handed over the company to my father-in-law, but he harbored concerns about the future, leading him to take decisive action. In the end, he decided he couldn't entrust it to his son and left it to the executive director. "What about the $1,820,000 debt?" my husband inquired. "That's gone now," I replied. Indeed, my grandfather-in-law had been a guarantor for a friend's dad, but he had personal assets exceeding that amount. However, I deliberately omitted this information to avoid my mother-in-law and husband targeting those assets. The friend was the son of a benefactor who had helped my father-in-law when he was young. Moreover, the countryside land owned by the son was going to be developed into a resort, allowing him to sell it at a high price. "You're kidding," my husband exclaimed. "More importantly, are you guys okay?" I asked, concerned. "We're not okay. Both my father and I were denounced by the company. What should we do now? My husband lamented. What? There's also the mortgage on the house. I revealed what? What do you mean, the mortgage on the house my husband took back? Haven't you realized it yet? The house money should have all been paid by Grandpa. I clarified Christopher signed without checking everything. It shows he really didn't have the qualities of a president. I added, You're kidding, my husband sighed. As a consequence, my parents-in-law lost the house they had built because they couldn't pay the mortgage. Now they reside in an old apartment over 50 years old, struggling to repay the unpaid loan despite their attempts to contact me. Suggesting we all live together, it was impossible. Now my grandfather-in-law retired from his chairman position and bought an old house in the countryside. Emily, you can go and live wherever you like, freely. You don't have to worry about living expenses, my grandfather-in-law assured me. But I chose to be with him. If I'm not in the way, please let me be with you, I expressed, tears welling up in my eyes. My grandfather-in-law's eyes welled up too. Thanks to Mr. Jones, the divorce was finalized and procedures were taken to exclude my former father-in-law and former husband from inheritance. I became my grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter. If anything happens to him, I intend to take care of him until the end. Now the two of us enjoy working in the fields together. Dad, look at this radish, it's big. I exclaimed as warm moments flowed in the pouring sunlight. I wish for these days to continue, even just one day longer. My name is Karen, and at 32 years old, I find myself reflecting on the transformative events of the past few months. 6 months ago, I faced a heart-wrenching loss with the passing of my grandfather, who had been my steadfast guardian and mentor throughout my life. Today is a significant day, as the lawyer is scheduled to reveal the details of my grandfather's will, a moment that feels both heavy and hopeful. Seeking comfort during this emotional time, I am grateful for the presence of my sister Helen, who is 3 years older than me. We share a bond forged in adversity, having lost our parents in a devastating accident 22 years ago. Since that tragic day, our grandparents have taken us under their wings, showering us with love and guidance. However, our family felt the sting of loss again when our grandmother died from an illness, leaving us in the caring but increasingly fragile hands of our grandfather. His health declined over the years, and out of deep concern, I moved into an apartment close to his home to ensure I could visit him regularly. Despite my frequent visits, he would often chide me playfully, claiming it was unbecoming for a grown woman to keep returning to her childhood home. Nonetheless, he always greeted me with a smile, his warmth undiminished by the trials of age. Then during a routine visit, a dire turn of events unfolded. I found my grandfather in severe pain at his doorstep. Frantically, I called for an ambulance, but despite the swift response, he passed away suddenly. Today, as the hour of the will reading approaches, Helen's voice cuts through my contemplation, reminding me to brew some tea for the occasion. As I make my way to the kitchen, I catch a glimpse of her relaxing on the mat, the familiar scent of her strong perfume filling the air, a reminder of her unchanging nature and the continuity of our shared past. I remember my sister Helen's teenage years vividly. She was the epitome of rebellion, experimenting with vibrant hair colors, and mingling with a crowd that our grandparents deemed troublesome. Despite the headaches she caused, necessitating frequent apologies from our grandparents, Helen seemed untouched by the disapproval, living her life with a carefree zest. Even as an adult, she maintained that free-spirited approach, working only part-time and often relying on our grandfather for financial support. Today, as the lawyer arrived to read our grandfather's will, I prepared tea to serve. Helen offered a formal greeting that filled the room, acknowledging the gravity of the moment. The lawyer, with his gentle demeanor reminding me of grandfather, accepted the tea and began to disclose the contents of the will. The document revealed that Helen was to inherit a staggering $30 million, while I bequeathed our family home and the land it stood on. Upon learning about her fortune, Helen burst into laughter, a reaction that left me standing in silent astonishment at the unexpected disparity in our inheritances. While Helen received a literal fortune in cold hard cash, I was left with what appeared to be nothing more than an ancient rundown house. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, and I couldn't help but chuckle quietly at the stark contrast in our fortunes. "How fitting for someone as plain as you," Helen teased, her laughter still resonating through the room. I tried to defend the value of my inheritance by pointing out the considerable size of the land that came with the house. "It's not just the house, there's also the land," I countered. Helen snorted dismissively at my comment. The potential value of the land in such a remote, seemingly forgotten place clearly didn't escape her, yet her preference was clear. "I would have preferred the cash," she remarked with a smirk, clearly pleased with her lot. The complexity of our inheritances mirrored the differences in our personalities and choices, adding a layer of bittersweet humor to the whole ordeal. Reflecting on the distribution of my grandfather's will, I couldn't help but feel a tinge of disappointment mixed with surprise. "I guess Grandpa really had a soft spot for me," I said, trying to mask the uncertainty in my voice. I reasoned with myself that perhaps he intended for me to preserve the cherished family home and land, a place rich with memories of him and my grandmother. "That's pretty awesome, isn't it?" remarked my boyfriend Alex, catching me off guard with his reaction as I relayed the details of my inheritance. However, his enthusiasm didn't quite resonate with me. I shook my head, implying that the reality wasn't as rosy as it seemed. As I shared the story, a sense of hollowness washed over me. Voicing the situation felt almost like confirming a sort of perceived lesser value. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, Alex made a rather thoughtless comment about the benefits of beauty and wealth. I gave him a sidelong glance, a silent reprimand for his tactlessness. Realizing his faux pas, he quickly shifted gears, joking about valuing my comfort more than material gains. Alex and I had been together since meeting at a social event, and today marked our first casual outing as a couple. Discussing the inheritance made me ponder the future, even imagining him as a potential husband. Little did I know this revelation would soon lead to an unexpected twist of regret. A few days later, as I entered the old family house to start the overwhelming job of sorting through my grandfather's possessions, I considered the idea of moving in. Its close proximity to my workplace made it an attractive option. Maybe I could really make a life here, even with a cat, I mused. The lack of rent was alluring, and I figured any maintenance costs could be managed with my savings. The thought of sharing this space with Alex even made me blush, embarrassed by my forward thinking. Rolling up my sleeves to begin cleaning, my contemplation was abruptly interrupted by the ringing of my smartphone. Glancing at the display, I saw my sister's name flash across the screen, hinting at more unexpected developments in what was shaping up to be a series of surprising events. "Hello, Karen. How are you faring in that quaint old house of yours?" she inquired, her tone laced with curiosity and a hint of irony. "I hoped you were finding some peace in being alone," I quipped, but it seemed my sister was indulging in a different kind of solace, one marked by rounds of drinks. Her speech always had a tendency to be languid and drawn out, but today it was noticeably more slurred as she spoke. As she continued, her words meandered with an alcohol-tinged flair, highlighting her afternoon choice of beverage, which I couldn't help but sigh at. "Miss Goody Two-Shoes," she echoed dramatically, playfully branding me with her usual nickname. It became obvious that her mirth stemmed from more than just liquor when she asked about my plans for the future. I hesitantly shared my thoughts about possibly moving into our family home, hoping to change the subject. Instead, she took this as an opportunity to flaunt her current luxurious surroundings in a posh hotel suite, her voice dripping with exaggerated zest. She then teasingly challenged me to guess who might be accompanying her, treating my ignorance with disdain. She provocatively suggested that my reserved attitude might compromise my relationship with someone named Alex. To my shock, Alex himself joined the conversation, leaving me reeling and filled with confusion. As Alex's familiar voice came through, a flood of troubling thoughts overwhelmed me. The sudden revelation of my sister's connection with him sketched a troubling image in my mind, one that had me feeling dizzied and unsettled. She went on to boast about capturing Alex's attention, narrating how she had learned of his workplace from me, approached him after work, and charmed him. Her words poured out boastfully, leaving me stunned and silent. Her subsequent apologies did little to soothe the emotional turmoil I felt. When Alex spoke again to explain his side, a chill swept over me. Draining my spirit as he admitted his attraction to my sister seemed more appealing and opportune, deepening my sense of betrayal. Trying to express my feelings amidst this chaos was nearly impossible. As I grappled with the shock and hurt of the moment, I found myself utterly speechless. Alex tried to rationalize his behavior, almost pleading with me to grasp the seductive appeal of a woman possessing significant wealth. I felt a deep recoil at his words, the sting of rejection and humiliation sharp and sudden. In the background, my sister's laughter, unreasonably loud and triumphant, punctuated the chaos she had wrought. As the phone was handed back to her, she delivered a statement with such finality it felt like a physical blow, announcing the end of our sisterly bond. Her words hung heavy in the air, the concept of sisterhood now just shattered fragments of a once treasured relationship. Over the next 6 years, solitude and heartache became my close companions. Now, as I sat with a cat peacefully dozing on my lap, the memories of that devastating phone call remained vividly etched in my mind. The room was filled with the soft hum of the cat purring in its sleep, a comforting sound on my day off. Yet there was a lingering sense of guilt about some unfinished work I had brought home. As I mulled over my to-do list, the tranquility was broken by the ring of my phone, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Assuming it might be work-related, I answered without suspicion. "Hello," I greeted, only to hear a voice that was unmistakably familiar. "Karen, long time no see," said my sister Helen, her unique speech patterns instantly recognizable despite the years. A smirk formed on my face as I acknowledged her, and as our conversation unfolded, Helen began prying into my personal life, inquiring about a new hotel near my home. I chose to keep the details to myself, deflecting her questions. The conversation took a surprising turn when Helen confessed her financial woes, revealing that she had blown through her entire inheritance in just 4 years. Even Alex, who had remained by her side, was now in debt. As I listened to Helen's request for a loan, my initial annoyance faded into a profound sense of detachment. I responded with calm, bringing up the consequences of her actions in the past, which prompted a flood of memories from 6 years ago, the day Alex ended our relationship. Devastated, I found comfort in an old painting I had given to my grandfather as a child. During a moment of introspection, I discovered a hidden note behind the painting, a letter addressed to me from my grandfather, written shortly before his death. In the letter, my grandfather explained the reasons behind the seemingly uneven distribution of his estate, emphasizing his deep appreciation for my constant care and presence in his final years. This revelation brought clarity to any lingering questions about favoritism and provided much-needed closure. It reassured me about my grandfather's intention, confirming that the distribution was a testament to the enduring bonds within our family and highlighting the true significance behind his decisions. As I digested the contents of the letter, a shiver ran down my spine at the realization that I could have easily missed this crucial message. Despite the clarity it brought, I still found myself deeply hurt by Helen's cruel words from that time. Although I had a strong connection with my grandfather, a twinge of jealousy lingered as I continued to read. Helen, it seemed, was not satisfied with a simple share of the inheritance. Her greed was pervasive, extending even to her role as a granddaughter. The letter starkly illuminated her actions, how she had not only squandered her inheritance, but also manipulated situations to her benefit, including taking Alex away from me. This acknowledgement from my grandfather, though painful, was a necessary insight into the dynamics that had long influenced our family's interactions. Feeling a duty to my grandfather's intentions, I had arranged to meet with Alex to discuss the inheritance. My grandfather's will had been crafted thoughtfully, seemingly granting Helen the larger share at first glance. However, a hidden detail in his letter revealed more. The land I received was expected to grow significantly in value due to urban development nearby. As I read through the letter, my eyes widened with surprise. Grandpa had suggested I could either live on the land if I felt emotionally attached to it, or sell it for a substantial profit when its value increased. His main wish was for my happiness. When I shared this revelation with Helen, she scoffed disdainfully and dismissively called me an old hag. Despite her reaction, I decided to heed our grandfather's advice. I lived in the house for a while, and once I was married and the land's value had risen sufficiently, I sold it. When Helen later approached me for a loan, I firmly told her I wouldn't lend her any money. In her frustration, she audaciously offered to return Alex to me as a bargaining chip. That was the last straw. I unleashed years of pent-up frustration, telling Helen how much her ingratitude repulsed me. I disowned her as my sister, making it clear I was already happily married and had no desire to see Alex again. I ended the conversation, blocked her calls, and apologized to my cat for the emotional upheaval. Unwilling to let go, Helen and Alex mistakenly stormed into what they thought was still my house, causing havoc. The police were called as they destroyed several items. It was then revealed during their questioning that they had previously committed marriage fraud to extract money. Both were arrested and faced charges that could lead to prison time. This final incident underscored the toxic dynamics that had escalated over the years, affirming my decision to cut ties and move on from the destructive relationship with my sister. Having successfully proven my lack of involvement after selling the land and severing ties with Helen, my husband came to pick me up from the police station. As we navigated the bustling corridors, we saw Helen and Alex, both looking distraught and barely recognizable, being escorted to another part of the facility. A wave of melancholy washed over me, seeing how far things had deteriorated, but the warmth of my husband's presence offered a comforting contrast. As we stepped outside into the crisp air, my husband's concerned gaze met mine. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laden with worry. I responded with a reassuring smile and placed his hand on my belly, feeling the gentle kick of our unborn child. "I have you and our baby right here," I said, the words not just a reassurance to him, but a reminder to myself of the new priorities in my life. The ride home was quiet, but filled with an unspoken understanding and comfort. We didn't need to discuss what had just transpired. We were both just relieved to be moving past the chaos. As we drove, I looked out the window, watching the scenery blur past, and reflected on the tumultuous events that had unfolded over the years. It dawned on me how life had thrown such unexpected challenges my way. And yet here I was, with a partner who stood by me, and a new life blossoming inside me. The stark contrast between my current state of peace and the turmoil of the past highlighted a profound truth about the human experience. Adversity is not just about the hardships themselves, but what we choose to carry forward from them. The ordeal with Helen and Alex was painful and fraught with betrayal, yet it also served as a pivotal point for me to reassess what truly mattered. It wasn't the monetary value of the inheritance that held weight. It was the lessons of love, resilience, and forgiveness that I would take away from the experience. As we arrived home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the stability and love that awaited me. Stepping through the door, my husband and I were greeted by the quiet comfort of our living space, a stark contrast to the stark and sterile environment of the police station. It was in this sanctuary that we would prepare for the arrival of our child, in a home filled with love and devoid of the shadows of the past. Over the next few months, as my belly grew and the baby's kicks became stronger, I often found myself thinking about the kind of world I wanted our child to inherit. It was a world where love and integrity stood at the forefront, where family was about support and understanding, not conflict and greed. I realized that teaching our child about these values started with how I lived my own life. The decision to let go of bitterness and focus on building a nurturing environment was not just for my own peace, but was a foundational step in crafting the legacy I would leave for the next generation. As I moved forward, every step felt lighter, each day brighter, with my husband by my side and the future ahead. I looked forward to the days when we could teach our child about the true essence of wealth. It wasn't measured in dollars and property, but in the moments of laughter shared, the hugs exchanged, and the unconditional love that bound us together.